Hey friend, welcome back to my channel. So I've been asked this question multiple times. What supplies would I recommend to beginners who are starting their art journey for the first time? I know exactly how you feel. It's so overwhelming to go to an art store and see so many art supplies and you don't know what to get. Also, they're quite expensive, so you want to be sure what you want to start with, right? So I'm excited to make this video for you today because I want to share with you the art supplies that I started with when I was a beginner and art supplies that I would recommend to you and to myself if I was starting, I guess, my art journey all over again. So if this is a topic that interests you, then keep watching. Hey there, I'm Elaine. I'm a designer and a self-taught illustrator with a small business. I upload artsy videos and tutorials and vlogs, so hit that subscribe button if you want to watch my journey. First, let's begin with sketchbooks. These are some of my early sketchbooks. I think you can never have enough sketchbooks because they're great for keeping track of your progress. You should definitely find one or a few so that you have a record of your art practice. This Moleskine sketchbook is great for gouache, color pencil, and ink pen. It's a great multimedia sketchbook, and I tend to use the pocket-sized sketchbook because I can take it everywhere I go. I also think it's a great size for beginners because it's less space to fill. I'd also highly recommend the Stillman & Burn sketchbook because it's great for multimedia. This is their Zeta series pocket size, and it handles most art materials very well. These multimedia sketchbooks can handle some watercolor, but it's not meant for watercolor, so if you overwork it, then the paper will pill. But the next few sketchbooks and paper pads I will recommend is specifically for watercolor. This Hamule sketchbook is for watercolor. The paper is cold pressed and it has a light texture, and it works great with other mediums too. This is the sketchbook that I've been using for most of my flower drawing tutorials on Instagram. Next, this is the Paul Rubens sketchbook. It is great for watercolor and gouache. It actually has cotton paper, which is great for watercolor because it tends to stay wet longer, allowing you to blend colors better. It's also perforated, so you can tear off pages and frame them or gift them. Alright, last sketchbook before we talk about paper pads. This is another Stillman & Burn sketchbook, but it's from the Delta series, and it's made specifically for watercolor. So it has cold pressed paper with some texture, and the paper color is ivory. It works really well with watercolor. Now let me share some watercolor paper brands with you. Currently I'm using a lot of fluid pads. These are quite affordable and they're good quality, so I would recommend these to beginners. You can pick between a cold pressed or a hot press. So basically cold press just has a slightly rougher texture and hot press has a very smooth grain. I will also list more brands that I like below, so check those out. Now, Arches is a very expensive, high-quality cotton watercolor paper. It is definitely a splurge, but I wanted to show it to you anyways because if you get serious about watercolor painting, then I would recommend you to do your masterpieces on this fancy watercolor paper. I promise you, painting on high-quality cotton paper makes a world of difference. Next, let's go over paints. First, we will start with gouache paint. What is gouache? Simply explained, it is an opaque watercolor. In the olden days, artists used to use them on posters because gouache can achieve a very matte and opaque outcome. These are a couple of examples of my gouache paintings. I personally think it's a great place to start for a beginner who doesn't know if they want to use acrylic paint or watercolor. I personally think it's a happy middle between acrylic and watercolor. Depending on the amount of water you use, you could get a very opaque acrylic look or a very watercolor-like look. With this medium, you can get a feel of what you enjoy working with and develop your own style. So Holbein was my first gouache paint. It's a bit pricey, so I'll recommend more affordable options for beginners later, but I'm glad I started with this brand because it helped me understand what working with quality gouache feels like. Now, gouache is actually best used freshly squeezed out of the tube. It'll give you the most opaque effect. But if you're lazy like me, you can also squeeze them into these little pans and make a DIY gouache watercolor palette. Now, I'm only sharing this because I get asked so much about it, but keep in mind that when gouache dries, the paint may be a little less opaque and it will feel more like traditional watercolor, which doesn't bother me, so that's why I use them this way. But when I want that thick, consistent look, I still go for freshly squeezed paint. Next is the Winsor & Newton Designer's Gouache. This is a classic gouache I would recommend even though the price is actually similar to Holbein, but it's a very good quality gouache with excellent light fastness. You can purchase a set of these, or I would recommend you buying the following colors. With this selection of paints, you should be able to mix a huge variety of colors. For a really affordable option, this is the Arteza gouache. Just FYI, all of these are my honest favorites. I am not endorsed by any brands. I prefer Arteza over the TikTok trendy Hemi gouache because I think the consistency of this paint is better. It feels similar to the previous gouaches. It'll stay fresh for longer because they're stored in tubes, and I love that there's a ton of pre-mixed colors, so it's great for beginners that don't know how to mix their colors yet. Now, I'm not sure about how the light fastness compares, but they are a great student grade paint, and the affordability will make you less stingy so that you can practice and go crazy with them. Now, for all you watercolor lovers, so similarly to gouache, I use the same brands, Holbein and Winsor Newton. I've heard of a ton of other great brands, but these are what's available at my local art shop, so that's what I have. I have watercolor in tubes and also in pans, and I trust these brands because they're highly pigmented and great to work with. And for travel, I have this Koi watercolor set that I love using. It's a great compact kit that includes a palette, 24 colors, and sponges on the side to dry off your brush. It also includes a water brush that I've misplaced. Now let me show you some watercolor examples. Watercolor is a transparent paint, unlike gouache. It also bleeds and spreads easier, making it very good for looser style paintings. Also, high quality watercolor is highly pigmented, and you should always use a watercolor paper with watercolor. Now for brushes. Honestly, I started painting with cheapo brushes from Michael's, a local craft shop. They had a huge set of brushes for like $5 or something. I used them until I discovered my favorite types of brushes and sizes. This is a set of brushes that I inherited from my husband because he started some sort of hobby and then he had no need of them anymore. Anyways, they are a cheapo synthetic brush set, and I found some brushes in here that I really liked. These are 3 brushes that I love working with: the flat, the filbert, and the round. The size of these brushes are around 4 to 6, this depends on your preferences. Now for gouache, one thing to look for are brushes that have stiffer bristles that bounce back and retain shape. You can see how these synthetic brushes hold shape really well. And if your set doesn't come with a nice detail brush, then I would recommend this Princeton round brush in a size 1. This way you'll be able to paint fine details. Now if you're leaning toward using watercolor instead of gouache, then you may want to invest in some nicer brushes as you get more serious. These are some synthetic Squirrel Blend watercolor brushes. They are softer, they hold more water, and they work great for a looser style watercolor painting. And all of these are listed, so you can check them out in the description below. For paint trays to mix your gouache on, I recommend using porcelain or clay tray, or even using a plate that you don't eat on anymore. Just give it a good spray of water before you start using it. The reason I prefer using a clay tray over a plastic tray is because dried gouache tends to flake off on plastic trays. But for watercolor, you can use anything. You can use the plastic, the clay, or any non-porous surface will work. Alright, next up is pens. If you love doing line art, then I would recommend the Micron's pen, and also I would recommend the Faber-Castell Pitt pen. And if you love lettering, then I would suggest using the Tombow brush and felt tip pen. I forgot to show those, but here are some fun illustrations that I did with pen and a little bit of color pencil. Alright, now let's move on to color pencils. I mostly use the Caran Pablo color pencils because they're super pigmented and smooth. Allegedly, they're not your regular wax color pencils. Some say there's oil in the composition of the lead, but the website doesn't state that, so I don't know their secret. This is the pencil sharpener that I like to use. I may or may not have gotten it because it was pink. I also like the Caran Luminance line, but they're really expensive, and I have the Faber-Castell Polychromos, but I would still say go to your local art store and test out these color pencils before buying any. And I also didn't purchase a set, I handpicked my own colors, so these are my most used colors. Alright, so here's a few more things before we wrap up. You can repurpose yogurt containers as your paint water cup. It's something that my elementary school teacher did, and I love this idea. And when it gets really gross, you can just replace it. Next, these bulldog clips are great for keeping your sketchbook flat, especially if you draw while traveling.
For a regular eraser, I like the Staedtler white eraser, and for getting into small areas without creating a lot of eraser dust, I like to use this Faber-Castell kneaded eraser. For underdrawings, I recommend using a hard pencil like the Staedtler H or 2H pencil. This lead is really hard and really light, so it won't smear. These jelly roll pens are great for creating highlights and drawing or writing on dark surfaces. Now lastly, if you're looking for a great roller, this is a Westcott see-through roller and it's one of my favorites. I have it in 3 of their sizes.
Well, I hope that I helped and you found something that you were looking for. If you have anything you want to share or recommend, then please comment below and let me know. And if you want to see more of my videos in the future, then remember to subscribe and turn on that little bell thing. All right, thanks for watching. I'll catch you later.